Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, created for people with diabetes by people who have diabetes, by Gvoke HypoPen, the first premixed auto-injector for very low blood sugar, and by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, taking part in a clinical trial is incredibly important, but it's often thankless. You don't expect to meet the people you might help years later. That's why it was remarkable when Alecia met Marty.
The people who tested that technology, I'll never meet them and tell them, but you're the reason that I can still see. You're the reason I have this job. You're the reason that I do all of these things. And my doctor had told me that most of them, they either lost their vision or they lost their life.
While she was moved because I was still alive and she'd been told we all died, I was just moved to meet somebody who had benefited and certainly appreciated.
Marty Drilling took part in a clinical trial in 1974 that later helped save Alecia Wesner's eyesight. We'll share their story and talk about how much progress has been made in treating diabetes eye issues. In innovations this week, a new partnership in the closed-loop space could bring a new pump to the U.S. market. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am so glad to have you along. If you're listening as this airs, it is Thanksgiving week here in the U.S., probably a Thanksgiving like none other for many of us, but I hope you are staying healthy and safe. Of course, on the show, we aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection. My son, Benny, was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2, and he is almost 16 years old. This episode, I think, is a really nice one for Thanksgiving. It gave me a lot to be thankful for, specifically the amazing people in the diabetes community who lived through very different times and went through these clinical trials to make things better for people that they assumed they would never meet. It's also a really great Thanksgiving story because it's just one of these heartwarming, I got to admit, Alecia made me cry. Oh, my goodness. It's a wonderful story. So I'm really glad you're here. We also have some really good information about not just taking care of your eyes, but complications that can happen, what you can do about them, and the progress that has been made. So if this is something that you have been worried about, I just saw a Facebook post from a young woman in her 20s who had something very similar to what Alecia went through. I think this will give you a lot of hope and some ways to take action. Quick reminder, my book, The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, is on sale through the end of this month. I think it makes a great holiday gift. You kind of have to sort of know who you're buying it for. Make sure if you're getting it for your mom or your wife that you let them know that you don't think they're the worst, that it's me who's the worst. I could see how that could go kind of wrong. But just go to diabetes-connections.com and you will see the book. Scroll down a little bit. There's also a tiny little shop button at the very top. But the promo code is November, and that'll take $4 off through the end of this month, and that is plenty of time to ship it to you for the holidays. And I will sign it if you buy it off my website. I can't sign it if you buy it off of Amazon, but it is there in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Okay, to Marty and Alecia in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, and it is so nice to find a diabetes product that not only does what you need, but also fits in perfectly with your life. OneDrop is that. It's the sleekest looking and most modern meter my family has ever used. And it's not just about their modern meter setup. You can also send your readings to the mobile app automatically and review your data anytime. Instantly share blood glucose reports with your healthcare team. It also works with your Dexcom Fitbit or your Apple Watch. Not to mention their awesome test strip subscription plans. Pick as many test strips as you need and they'll deliver them to your door. OneDrop, diabetes care delivered. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneDrop logo. My guests this week were diagnosed a generation apart, but boy, are they peas in a pod. I think Alecia even says that at one point. Alecia Wesner was diagnosed in 1979 when she was 6. Marty Drilling was diagnosed at the age of 4 in 1953. I asked them to come on the show because back in October, I saw a Facebook post from Alecia talking about her virtual JDRF bike ride. And here is what she said. Today, I ride to honor my friend Marty, one of the original clinical trial patients of laser eye treatments for diabetic retinopathy. He is one of the reasons I have my vision after many years of laser treatments in my 20s and early 30s. Thank you, Marty. I had to find out the story behind this, so I called them up and brought him on. Quick note before we jump in, we are going to talk a little bit in this interview about eyes and eye surgery. I don't know about you, I'm really squeamish. Even though I've had LASIK, I have my own eye issues. If that is you, I promise I will jump back in with a quick heads up. I will warn you and let you skip ahead over that stuff if you prefer. And keep in mind, we get to this late in the interview, but you should know up front, treatments have changed significantly from what Marty and even Alecia went through. So if this is something you need, this is an interview that should encourage you. It shouldn't scare you. Alecia, Marty, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing your stories today. I appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you for having us.
I admit I don't know much more about either one of you than the Facebook post Alecia put out not too long ago. And I thought, I got to talk to these people. So, we'll get to that. We'll talk about clinical trials and how you two met. But first, let me just set the stage a little bit, if you don't mind. Alecia, can you start by just telling us your diabetes story? When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in 1979. So I had type 1 for 41 years. I have, like you said, been in a lot of clinical trials over the last 6 to 7 years of my life, mostly in the AP space. And I live in New York City. I'm very active with JDRF. I'm a JDRF rider. And I've ridden many, many miles on a bike.
And when you say AP, you mean the artificial pancreas trials?
Yes.
And Marty, what's your story?
Well, I was 4.5 when I was diagnosed in 1953. So I've been living successfully with my diabetes for 67 years, if my math is correct. My first clinical study was the one that Alecia and I bonded over, was my in 1974, when I was in my final year of law school. I finally went to the Joslin Clinic in Boston, and they said, you're going to go blind if you don't do anything. And they had the new laser surgery study going on through the NIH. So I was one of the original guinea pigs in that, and fortunately it proved to be very successful. And I still have my vision 40 some odd years later. And when Alecia and I first met, which was just about a year ago, it was at a advocacy day on the Hill in Washington, D.C., and I happened to mention I was a participant in that study, and Alecia immediately reacted and said, oh, I had that too. And then Alecia could pick up the story from there because it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, please no, Marty is downplaying this. So
we'll get
Marty
to
and
it.
I, we spent an entire day together, and we're like two peas in a pod, and really like glued to each other's side through this whole day through Washington, running around and talking about diabetes and life. And one of the things that we talked a lot about, Marty was asking me a lot of questions about the AP trials that I was participating in and different pumps. So what I hadn't asked Marty was more of his diabetes story. So we were at Elizabeth Warren's office, and Marty ended up telling the story about his life with diabetes, but specifically about being in trials for retinopathy. And I got totally choked up, which I am now. Sorry. But in listening to him, I have spent a lot of my adult life advocating for clinical trials and clinical trial participation. And one of the things, I get to be on a stage and tell people about this is my experience, and that's why we need to push these things forward. But one of the things I always show are pictures of my eyes, because I was diagnosed with retinopathy in my 20s, which was terrifying. I work in a visual field and rubbed my eye one day and noticed that the graph paper I was looking at was waves and not straight. And, I'd seen doctors, I had my eyes checked every year, and they had said they were starting to see something, but it didn't really panic me until I saw it myself. I saw a doctor who said, you have two options, and one is we keep doing laser, and the other was a very aggressive form of laser that was new. And I went, I was 24 years old, I went with the aggressive one. But long story not short, was that one of the things I always talk about for why I participate in clinical trials is that I will never have the opportunity to thank the people who kept my eyesight. The people who tested that technology, I'll never meet them. and tell them, but you're the reason that I can still see. You're the reason I have to strap. You're the reason that I do all of these things. And my doctor had told me that most of them, they either lost their vision or they lost their life. Yeah. And many of them were gone. So I just assumed everybody was, for lack of a better word, dead. And so Marty telling this story, I just lost it. And this was my friend for an entire day. We ate lunch together. Like, we had this whole day of bonding. And all of a sudden, it's like all these people I've always wanted to thank. You're the person.
Oh, my goodness.
So I was a mess. So there is a picture of us that I took because I am really into capturing the moment in which we are both crying outside Elizabeth Warren's office about the fact that there's no more important moment to me than this moment. So yeah, so that is how we are friends. So I'm sorry, Marty, I took over your version of the story.
I'm upset with both of you now because I think I have cried twice on this podcast in 5 years. And you've just done it again. And it takes a lot. But I think because, and this is about you guys, but I think when you have a child diagnosed so young and you have to jump in and take care and do all this stuff, and plus I've worked with information for so long, my whole career has been in news. I hate to put it this way, but you kind of harden your heart. But at the same time, I'm with you, Alecia. I think all the time about the people that have done so much to make my son's life better. And to meet somebody like that in the circumstances in which you met Marty,
yeah.
And so Marty, let's swing over to you and don't brush it off. I know you're going to try, but what was going through your head when you looked over at Alecia and realized her reaction?
As I said to Alecia, I was really moved because this is the first time I had ever really met somebody and talked to somebody who had benefited from my laser treatment experimentation. And it moved me just to realize in specifically that as a result of my efforts and many others, Alecia still had benefited. And I knew that in general terms, but I really had never talked to anybody who had benefited from that. So while she was moved because I was still alive and she'd been told we all died, I was just moved to meet somebody who had benefited and certainly appreciated.
So if you don't mind, let me ask some details. And I always say, look, if this gets too personal, we'll move on. But I'm very curious, if you don't mind, Alecia, what happens? So when you're treated like this, does it go away after a while and you're fine now? Do you have to continue treatment? Would you mind kind of sharing what you went through? Right back to Alecia in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke HypoPen. Almost everyone who takes insulin has experienced a low blood sugar, and that can be scary. A very low blood sugar is really scary. That's where Gvoke HypoPen comes in. Gvoke is the first auto-injector to treat very low blood sugar. Gvoke HypoPen is premixed and ready to go with no visible needle. That means it's easy to use. How easy is it? You pull off the red cap, you push the yellow end onto bare skin, and hold it for 5 seconds. That's it. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Now back to Alecia talking about her issues with her vision and what she was able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that my situation could be different than somebody else's, but for me, I was in my 20s. This was, certainly a wake-up call of my own diabetes care, and maybe I could take it up a notch. And I had not been on a pump before that and decided if that would give me tighter control, that this was the time to make this decision, which I look back at, which I think a lot of people who are on pump technology say the same thing, which is that they wish they had done it sooner. And I'm certainly in that boat. But I had aggressive laser for years. And I am extremely grateful to the Martys of the world, specifically Marty, and also really, really great doctors. My vision is fine now. I'm 47 years old. So I wear glasses because I'm old, not because because of anything diabetes related. I will say, so both of my eyes have been treated a lot. I have not had any laser in well over 15 years, which is great. And I just saw my eye doctor recently, and he said, your eyes have never looked better. And that's what he says every time I see him. That's a nice thing to hear. As somebody who, my career is in lighting design, the irony of all of this and that it's lasers treating my eyes, it's always been interesting to me. So I ask a lot of questions at the doctor's office, and I get a copy of all of my scans because I like to look at them, and I have them hanging in my office because they kind of center me and they remind me that, life is short and to be grateful for the things you have. So I guess to answer your question, my vision is fine, but if I close one eye or the other and look at graph paper, it's definitely distorted, but my eyes compensate for that together.
Wow. And Marty, I was kind of struck when we started this conversation. You said you did your first clinical trial in 1974, which is 5 years before Alecia was diagnosed, which is interesting to look at. Would you mind taking us through a little bit of what your management was like at that time and just kind of talk a little bit about what it was like then?
Well, way back then, you were told, and now you have to understand, I have to take a step back.
Sure.
Back in 74, I was living in Boston, and I only went to the Joslin Clinic, which of course is one of the pioneers in the study of diabetes, in that year when it was my third year of law school, and I had never been to a specialist before. So what we did was what my parents had cobbled together, because they were frequently told when I was first diagnosed, and they would call and say, hey, listen, you said he shouldn't have a snack in the afternoon, but if I don't give it to him, he's going to pass out. And my mother often says that when she would call the doctor's office, they would say, Mrs. Drilling, you know more about treating diabetes than we do, so you just do what you think is appropriate. And that was not an easy burden for my parents to bear, and I give them all the credit in the world. But I stuck to what I can remember is I stuck to the basic, I'd have, whatever I had for breakfast at that time. I would try to maintain a boring diet just so I could try to stay within some bounds of normalcy. And don't forget, we didn't have the meters until probably around that time. And so we were just testing our urine in a cup, and I always thought orange was the predominant color because it always came up orange. As I told my mother, you have to live. So I would go out with my friends and have a drink, a beer or two, on weekends and whatever. But I was a student, so I did a lot of studying in law school. So that sort of helped me maintain some degree of normalcy. And I'd exercise. I was much more, probably because my blood sugars were higher then, but I could do a lot more exercise then because my blood sugars didn't plummet except on rare occasions. And fortunately, my friends could tell when I wasn't doing well and would help me out.
But it's interesting, and I know that some of us have a misconception of the diabetes dark ages, that people were like lying in bed or weren't living life. And there you are. You went to college. You were in law school at this point. I mean, you found a way to make it work even before blood sugar meters were at home and were a thing.
It's not like I had a choice, but absolutely. And I am an eternal optimist, so I figured, hey, this is what I have to deal with it. You deal with it, you move forward. And the whole idea is to enjoy your life, not to sit there and moan and groan that you have, an illness, because everybody has something.
So when you found the clinic at the Joslin Center, when you signed up for those clinical trials, how long did that last? Was it once and done? Did you continue to do that for years? Can you take us through a little bit of what those trials were like? Okay, remember when I said I would jump in? Here I am. If you are squeamish, skip ahead about 2.5, maybe 3 minutes. If you are really sensitive and don't want to hear any details of any eye surgery, I'm sorry, but you have to skip ahead about 8 minutes when we switch to talking about Alecia's experience with artificial pancreas trials. But truly, 2.5 to 3 minutes will take you through what I would consider the most sensitive stuff that's happening in this interview. The rest of it just makes reference to eye surgery and some procedures without anything that I would consider really sensitive. Okay, fair warning. Back to Marty.
Sure. First trial was in my left eye, and I think I told Alecia this story, but when I went in there, it's like a Frankenstein movie because it was a very sparse room. It was just the Dr. Cabral and his secretary, and they I had to lie down on this metal table, and then he'd approach with he had to anesthetize my eye, and this is very primitive, as you can well imagine. Oh. And so he approached with a needle that I thought was about 10 feet long to, stabilize and anesthetize the eye so it wouldn't move. And then back then they had a huge light to make sure he could see where it was going. And he told me it had the same brightness as the lights they used to light up the ocean when the astronauts were landing at night. And then he just started zapping away, and that had to do that for 3 days in a row. And he said, you have to be very careful. You don't want to jostle your eye. I put books under the top where my head was under the bed to make sure my head always stayed above my heart. So after 3 days with the left eye, I would go back and see them. I think I was going back like every 3 months or so. It was a long time ago, and I don't always remember all the details. But I had laser surgeries. I don't know how. I lost track of the number of times I got zapped in both eyes. As the years went on, the improvements in the treatment went on. And so by the time the last laser treatment I just had to put my eye up to the machine, resting my chin on the little bar there, and they could zap it right from there as opposed to having to, they just would put drops in the eye. So in terms of pain, it was much less painful and much less cumbersome.
Do you remember about when the last treatment was? I mean, are we talking a year later, 10 years later? I'm just trying to get a sense of that.
It was at least well into the 80s. Because don't forget, they had to make sure it worked in the left eye, and then I needed it in my right eye as well. So yeah, it was, the 80s would have been, I'm sure it was at least into the 80s, could have been in early 90s. And then, but I haven't had treatment for a while. I've had a couple of vitrectomy surgery because my vitreous is wrinkled in one eye. And but similar to what Alecia just said, the last number of years I've been in to see the doctor, they're very happy that it's stable. They have some issues with my right eye, which is my good eye. But they said it's stable, so we can just keep doing what you're doing.
That's great. So how do
you... is.
I bet. So how do you, if you don't mind, again, this is a little personal, but how is your day-to-day vision? I mean, we're all wearing reading glasses, as Alecia said, that kind of stuff. But,
we're just old.
Right, exactly, no doubt. But how is that for you, Marty?
Well, my vision, I can see, which is 90% of the battle. I try not to drive at night. Because I have low vision impact, and it's very difficult to read street signs, and the light bulbs become stars as opposed to circular. So, but other than that, I don't have any restrictions on reading. Once in a while I'll get a floaty, but it has not impacted my quality of life to any significant degree. And since I enjoy walking, I don't mind walking around to various restaurants or whatever that are nearby.
Alecia, let me ask you, people, including me, are a little squeamish. And I've had eye surgery and I've had eye issues. I don't have diabetes, but I've had other issues. And it is one of the things that I think makes many of us very nervous, to the point that I would be concerned that some people with diabetes or any condition would be scared enough not to want to seek treatment. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, look, you've already mentioned you got like eyeball pictures in your office, so I'm not sure you're the best person to ask. But can you perhaps ease some fears about getting treatment for retinopathy?
Well, I do think one thing that I should have made clear earlier is that treatments have really changed certainly since Marty had laser treatments and that I have had laser treatments. I mean, from the diabetes perspective, although laser is still one of the treatments, there are more options than there used to be. And I know for me, I think I'm pretty selective about my doctors. I've taken years to build up like my dream team. I really like my eye doctor. I admire him. He saved my vision. So I think that helps a little bit too. But also I think that these appointments, it's not like you're there for a month. It's one appointment. You do it once a year. And then if you have a problem, you make your decisions on how you want to be treated. But the actual laser part of it, the types of things that I was having done, it's more the waiting that is the harder part than the actual treatment. You have to keep your head still and your eye is being held open. And I guess for somebody who's like squeamish about their eyes, that must sound kind of freaky, but I would think you'd rather have your eye held open than be trying to do it yourself. Yeah. So, it's just a matter of staying still. And I don't know if I will ever be good at meditating, but I think the focusing on other aspects of life or something like that. I mean, it's no different than any other part of diabetes care. Some of it flat out sucks, but these are the steps that you take for your life to go on. And certainly for me with my eyes, I'm looking at a picture in my office right now of my eye, and it looks like all little dots all over the inside of my eye, and that is scar tissue from where they cauterize the vessels. And that is not what a normal eye looks like, and that is the inside of my eye. But when I look at that, I didn't feel anything during that. There's no physical pain. It's just the discomfort of staying still and a bright light being in your eye for a little bit of time. So I think in the scheme of physical pain of things that you're treated for, certainly as somebody who's broken quite a few bones, a broken bone is 1,000 times worse than having your eyes treated. But I think the stress of the anticipation of having a problem is really the hardest part.
If anybody is concerned today about getting treatment for their eyes, the progress that has been made makes it a totally different experience from what Alecia experienced and what I experienced. And they don't even use laser treatments as their primary choice for treatment of anybody with the retinopathy. So they shouldn't be squeamish. It sure beats the alternative of not being able to see.
Alecia, I've got to ask you, because, you've been through these clinical trials, and my son uses Control IQ. I'm curious, what led you to that, and when did you jump in? Was it back with type 0 years ago?
Yeah, well, this is a crazy story. So I live in New York City, and I was at a JDRF board meeting, and Todd Brobson spoke, and he had been in a lot of the very early closed-loop clinical trials at UVA. And at the end of his speaking, I asked to take a picture with him and hugged him, and I don't know that he was totally comfortable with that, but I'm aggressive. But I felt so passionate about what he was doing, and that how could I do something like that? And then, you worry because you've had diabetes for so long that you won't qualify. Am I almost too broken to participate in these things? So I got on the list at UVA along with a very good friend of mine. And over about a year and a half, there were a couple times where they were going to bring us in, and, we got our physicals and all of those things. And then we both got an email saying, we have good news and bad news. The good news is the trial we were going to use you for has made enough progress that we don't need you anymore, which, if you think you're going to be in a trial, that's a real bummer. Especially because you're trying to coordinate how you're going to get to UVA and take time off of work and all of this other stuff. But the good news was that the next phase of trials now was going to go out to other research institutions, and one of them was Mount Sinai in New York. I got this email as I was sitting for my regular 3-month checkup with my endocrinologist and Dr. Carol Levy, and she was the doctor who was going to be overseeing the trial.
Oh, that's
so
great.
When she walked into the room, I said, "You're never going to believe this." And she said, "I already know." They sent us your file as somebody who maybe could be in this trial. So that's how it all started for me. But I think for me, at a certain point in my life view is that this life is really a gift and that I am lucky to be here and that I have lived on borrowed time since I was 6 years old. So I think I had gotten to a point where, I can do fundraising, and I can do walks, and I can do rides and everything else. But what is the next level for me of how, my life and this body can make an impact? And I thought being in a clinical trial. So, some of the trials have been much more challenging than others. One of them was actually up at Joslin. And I wish I had known Marty then, because I then walked around Joslin after everything. And they had done a lot of eye scans. And they have the original equipment for diabetes
wow.
treatment, eye treatment in the lobby at Joslin. And to me, that hit me hard because, you know, your life is like not a straight line and not a normal path that you plan. But that was a real moment. This friendship that I have with Marty is, you know, we were laughing about the fact that it's been a year, but Marty and I talk all the time. And I'm such a crybaby. I'm a mess. And I've only had like 2 cups of coffee. Like usually this is like a drink. You know? But
totally understandable.
But you know, I just feel really lucky, and I am glad for that. And it is such a pleasure to know somebody who has, you know, like Marty. There were no blood meters when I was a kid. It was testing your urine, and the technology has changed so much. I mean, carb counting didn't exist. But I look at that, and it's such a special thing to have this bond with somebody else, and that they really did have an impact on your life.
Marty, have you been back to Joslin? Have you seen that in the lobby?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's down in the BFMI unit. It's prominently displayed there in the lobby, the corner of the waiting room. I have seen it, and that, like Alecia, makes a big difference. Joslin does a great job of maintaining the history of the development so that we can all appreciate it, how far we've come. We don't have a cure, but most diseases you never get a cure. But certainly with the improvements made with the pump and carb counting, we have a lot of instant information to help you make the best decision you can based on what the facts are at the time, knowing full well that what may work 5 days in a row, which isn't going to work 6 days, 6, 7, or 8. But that's just the reality of the situation. And listening to Alecia, she's right, I think we have a unique bond just because we have so many shared experiences and have the same approaches. You take advantage of each day and you treasure it.
Before I let you go, I'm curious, Marty, one more question about, you know, your story here. They told you, it sounds like one of the reasons you did the clinical trial in the first place was because they said, you know, it's 1974. You're probably going to go blind if you don't do this. And I'm curious, you know, looking back at that, what's that like to hear those words? I talked to a lot of people who were diagnosed, you know, before, I mean, I'll just put down 2000 as a casual marker. I'm kind of making that up. But I know people who were diagnosed in the 1990s who were told they wouldn't live to be 30 years old. You know, it's got to be devastating to hear that. And I don't know how somebody hears that and says, forget you, I'm going to fight. I'm going to do what I need to do to make it. I'm just curious, you know, when you hear words like that, how do you keep going?
From my point of view, I said, I'm going to make the most of each day if that's what's going to happen. You certainly don't have an alternative because, as Elliot Jocelyn said, if you comply with the rules and, you know, live a good life in terms of diabetes care, you can survive. And if you don't, you're going to die a quick and very painful death. So that left an impression. But, you know, you're talking about those who were diagnosed in the 90s. Back in the 50s, my mother, I was 4.5, and my parents were told he's not going to make it to his 11th birthday. So like Alecia, every day is a gift. I just figured I'm going to get the most out of life while I have it. In the 70s, every October, the New York Times would run a full-page article on all the deleterious side effects of diabetes, long-term complications. So I figured if I survive to the age of 40, I'm going to not have any legs or be blind. So that certainly impacted, I'm sure, on some of the nights when I decided I was going off this strict regimen. But all in all, I just said, I sort of figured if I can defy science, then that's all right in my own book. And so I just kept wanting to prove people wrong. But it did. It impacts how you think about life. Certainly, I didn't do some things, like I never took up skiing, for an example, and Alecia can, because I was told my eyes would, all the jolting and going down the ski slope would cause my eyes to hemorrhage. So there are sacrifices you make, but I just never let it stop me from getting out of bed in the morning and doing something positive.
And now, Alecia, I'll ask you too, it is remarkable to meet someone like Marty, who, as you said, for years you wanted to thank the people that had done these clinical trials. What is it like now knowing that you are that person for other people? There is somebody who is in 21 who is thanking you, who may never meet you, for doing these clinical trials and everything you have done.
Yeah, that part's a little weird. So, because Marty actually asked me this one time about how I see him, that other people will see me like that. And I really poo-pooed the whole thing. But there is a sense of responsibility. Like when you're in these trials, you're following a lot of rules. And I think the reason that I kept kind of working my way up the chain of clinical trials as far as AP stuff went was because at the beginning, they want to make sure you're on a tight schedule and you're writing everything down. And, it's a huge time commitment. So I think I've taken the responsibility of being in trials very seriously because I want these technologies to work. But I think for me, and Stacey, you're a mom to somebody with type 1 diabetes. I think that a lot of credit goes to my parents. My parents, when I was diagnosed, the doctor said she's a child first and a diabetic second. And that really, they took that to heart. And I played sports I didn't want to play, like sports I hated. My parents made me play because I was going to show the world that I could do this, but also because I was supposed to be getting exercise. And I went to sleepovers of kids I did not like in my class because my mom thought if this person, when I was diagnosed, the concern in the neighborhood was that I was contagious.
Right. It must have been wild.
Yeah. And, all of a sudden, I went from having friends to, and, this is long before the internet and I'm so old, but, somebody invited me to sleep over and I thought this girl was a bully and my mom said, "You're going there." And I was like, "Please don't make me go. Please don't make me go." And I ended up going to a sleepover because her mom really wanted to put it out there that it was okay to have me sleep over. And I look back at, my parents pushed me so much. And I guess there's a negative to that too. But I think in the end, I went to college and I knew somebody else with type 1 who went to a local school because her parents didn't want her. They thought it was too much of a risk to move away. And Stacey, as you pointed out, we both went to Syracuse, and Syracuse was, a whole different world than what I had come from. But I think those things, and I do think that's part of the bond that I have with Marty beyond we have these clinical trials and we both have diabetes and stuff like that. It's that I think we both have a very similar approach to life, which is go out there and do it. And that doesn't just relate to diabetes. That's life.
I love it. Well, it has just been remarkable to listen to both of you. I hope I've done your stories justice here. I'm still kind of teary, and I'm not happy about that. Trying to stay professional.
So wait, Marty just had his wedding anniversary this summer, and I spent the day with him and his wife.
Marty, how long have you been married? Tell us about your wife.
My wife is a saint. We've been married 47 years. I have 2 kids and 5 beautiful grandchildren. And I tell people all the time that without her, I don't think I'd still be here because she has accepted the burden of living with a type 1 diabetic and does what she knows has to be done. Even if I'm having my low when I get nasty, she tolerates it and then I pay for it later. But I get out of that immediate situation. And so, yes, Maureen has been a godsend. And after we got married, she actually went to nursing school because that would give her more flexibility in working with the kids. But it also has been a huge benefit for my day-to-day existence and our day-to-day life together.
Marty, Alecia, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing your stories. And I hope you come back. Let's check in again, maybe, next year and see how everybody's doing. But thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for the invite. And it's great talking to you and Alecia.
Yeah, thank you.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
Lots more information on what you need to know about taking care of your eyes. We will link up more information about some of these clinical trials. I just found this story to be fascinating. You can go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the episode homepage, as always, for the links and the info and the transcript. I so enjoyed this interview. I think you can probably tell. As I said, I don't get too emotional about this stuff anymore, but every once in a while it sneaks up on you. And boy, I mean, you can't even hear it really during the interview. I cried so much more. I was a complete mess. And it was one of the few days, I forgot what I was doing that day, but I'd actually put on makeup. I had something else where I had to be on camera, and I was a complete mess. Ew. I haven't cried off my mascara in a very long time, thanks to all this working from home. Hopefully we'll follow up with Marty and Alecia. I really think they'd be fun to check back in with. Okay, up next, we're going to talk innovations. A new team is announced for the United States pump market. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. Do you know about Dexcom Clarity? It's their diabetes management software, and for a long time, I just thought it was something our endo used. You know, you can use it on both the desktop or as an app on your phone. It's an easy way to keep track of the big picture. I check it now about once a week. I probably check it a little bit less than that these days, but it really helps Benny and me dial back and see longer-term trends and help us, not overcorrect to what just happened for one day or even 1 hour. The overlay reports help put context to Benny's glucose levels and patterns. You can even share the reports with your care team, which makes appointments a lot more productive. Managing diabetes is not easy, but I feel like we have one of the very best CGM systems working for us. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. As I am taping this episode, it has just been announced, and I mean like an hour ago, that Eli Lilly and Ypsomed have entered into an agreement to, quote, advance an automated insulin delivery system. They are getting into the hybrid closed loop market. There is going to be a lot more information forthcoming. I have already contacted these folks to see if they'll come on. I definitely want to talk to Lilly. I really want to talk to Ypsomed. I hope I'm saying that right. This is a European pump company that has been out, I'd say since the mid-2000s, probably since 2016. I know a couple people who use it who are very happy with it. It hasn't come to the United States yet, but Lilly plans to bring it here. They will probably submit in 2022 if all goes well. So who knows if it'll be early or late or when that will actually come out. But here's what's interesting to me. And again, we're getting a lot more details in. Podcasting is not the best way to get breaking news, so I will be putting more out on social media. But here's my very quick take. About two and a half years ago, in May of 2018, a bunch of bloggers and I guess influencers were invited to Lilly's headquarters in Cambridge in Massachusetts, as Lilly had this connected diabetes solutions system that they started talking about and apparently or supposedly wanted blogger input. So we all went and we were shown an early prototype of what was supposed to become Lilly's pump. And I assume now that they are not going to use what we saw, which was a little disc. It was a little bit smaller than, I think at the time, people compared it to like a little round box of shoe polish or tobacco chew, that kind of stuff. It was about the size of a small coaster. It was less than an inch high. It was very sleek and tiny. It was connected to the body by a little tube. So you could make the tube longer or you could make the tube shorter. The idea was that you'd wear it close to the body, kind of like what we've seen of the upcoming and expected Tandem T-Sport, where it has a tube, but it is supposed to be placed very close or on the body like an Omnipod. And you can hear us talk about Lilly's connected diabetes solution, as they call it, in a past episode. I will link that up. It also features pens, and it is, at least at the time we were shown, it would be using the Dexcom CGM. I don't see an announcement of that. I don't see a CGM announced with this, but of course there will have to be one. The assumption would be that it is Dexcom since Lilly has an agreement with them. But what's troubling, and I guess that's a strong word to use, but I'll use it. What's troubling about this is that this pump will use pre-filled insulin cartridges for Lilly's rapid-acting insulins. So it is a proprietary insulin system. I don't think there's any other pump on the market that only uses one kind or one brand of insulin. And my guess is they will make sure of that by making the cartridges a special shape or some kind of patent so that if you want to use a Novo insulin in it, you can't. I don't know for sure. We haven't seen that. The DIY community is fabulous at this. And if it can be done, I know they will get it done. But I find that troubling. And we voiced that in 2018. We asked about using only Lilly's insulin in their pump and how troubling that would be. And at the time, reading between the lines, my takeaway was Lilly feels, the insulin makers all feel, that the ride's going to be over soon. States are getting into the action. They are cracking down on price. There are going to be reforms, whether they're on the federal level or not, and they're not going to be able to charge what they have been for insulin, and they need to find a way to continue to make the outrageous sums of money that they are making. I know it's not very nice of me to say, but you know how I feel about this. So I think proprietary pumps are one way that they may try to do that. I, of course, will give Lilly a chance to respond. As I said, I've already reached out to them and to Ypsomed, so hopefully they will come on the show and tell us more. Competition in the pump market is a great thing, but not if it's at the expense of competition, little as it is, in the insulin market. Home stretch of 2020. And like a lot of you, this year cannot end soon enough for me. However, there's still some good stuff to come. We will look on the bright side as much as we can. And Friends for Life is coming up. They are doing a wonderful virtual winter conference. I will link some information in the show notes as well. We are doing our game show, Wait, Don't Poke Me, which is one of my favorites. And we had a great time doing this. I love writing all the nonsense that goes into the show. If you haven't listened to it or seen it in the past, it's a takeoff of NPR's Wait, Don't Tell Me. If you haven't heard that show, I highly recommend you listen to it. It's just a fun trivia, news, nonsense. There's limericks. It's really a fun game show. Doing these game shows without an audience is very difficult. My panelists were ready and game and up for anything, and they did a great job. I might have to put a laugh track in as I edit it. We shall see. But I hope if you're going to Friends for Life virtually that you stop by, watch the game show, and take part. We have some fun interaction. Last time we did this over the summer, I created a bingo game where you could play along from home. I think we'll do that again. And then we are just looking forward to 2021. I have lots of fun stuff in store for the podcast as usual. I always want to hear from you. Let me know what you think, what you like to hear, what you don't like to hear. I take it all to heart and do the best that we can. Thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Simms. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.